So I'm a user. I'm hired at Virtulo. I'm ready to start working. What kind of things should I do next? I need to access my ERP application. I'm a sales guy or whatever, and I need to access ERP. So I'm going to go and open up a request to my ERP application. Look at that. I got an icon on the desktop. How convenient. It's set up and it's ready for me to go, and I'll connect to it. Whoops. Well, maybe I'm not going to connect to it. I'm getting an error message. I can't connect to the database. And so what do users do? They get an error message. What do they do? I like to listen to kind of the futurists where they talk about it, and they say, oh, well, the future is people are going to tweet at you, or they're going to use their Alexa to use AI to something, something, something. Those are cool ideas. I love them. But I live in the real world. And in the real world, people pick up the phone and they call. And until we have a generational die-off, 30, 40 years from now, people still gravitate towards the phone as a way to solve their problems. And so that's why I sent them the support email or the support phone number in that text that I sent out to my user to introduce. And so, me as a user, this is broken. I'm going to call in to the help desk. What's going to happen? So let's call in real quick. Let's jump back over to our phone. Here's our support number that I gave them. I'm going to go ahead and call into it and put it on speakerphone, and we'll walk through that process.
Thank you for calling Virtulo. Your call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes. To speak to the IT service desk, please press 1. To speak to human resources, please press 2.
You can see it doesn't have to be just for IT. It can be for other departments as well with our voice solution. So we're going to speak to the IT department. We're going to press number 1.
Hello. Thank you for calling the Virtulo IT service desk.
We are experiencing an ERP system login failure.
So
if you would like to create a ticket for this and receive an automated callback upon resolution, please press 1.
Hey, I'm having that exact problem. So I'm going to press 1
to disconnect.
Now, it's going to read back to me the incident number. You guys don't need to hear that boring part, but look at what happened. We're having a major incident or a master incident, and a user calls in. If we have a lot of users calling in because we're having issues, does that make our life easier? Does that help us solve the problem faster? No, it's the opposite. It just drowns us in it. So you have the ability to declare a master incident in our incident management system, and then that reports out through our voice automation software to tell the user that that's happening. Now, in my fantasy world, it's easy to fix it, so I'm going to go and fix that ERP system. And well, wait a minute, the help desk is calling me. Oh, okay, let's see what they have to say.
This is an automated message regarding ticket number 11719 is closed, which will greatly improve your day and bring a smile to your face. Goodbye.
So when's the last time that the help desk reached out to me kind of proactively like that after we've solved the problem? So you can see that after someone went in and resolved that master incident, I, as a user, was subscribed to that incident, and I can have it respond via email as well and things like that. But an outbound call to a user to inform them that the problem is solved. So our voice automation software is really cool that it can interact with users at more than a level of just hey, we received a phone call and an analyst picked it up. So let's go through a couple of other scenarios that a user would want to do. They're going to have problems with and if I wanted to show off what that looked like, the problem's been solved, they come back in and they hit refresh, and magically their ERP system is now functioning. It's that easy to fix the ERP system in my universe. So let's go and walk through an example of a user forgetting their password. So for some reason I don't have that text message, or it's a couple days later and I've forgotten that. A user wants to call in with a password reset. So let's go ahead and call back in one more time.
Thank you for calling Virtulo. Your call may be monitored or recorded for quality purposes. To speak to the IT service desk, please press 1. To speak to human resources, please press 2.
So we've had some cool examples of people, doing things like payroll, where people needed to call in. Maybe their they're non-computer users and they need to ask about their payroll information, their HR information. So don't think this is just an IT solution. It works for lots of different stuff. So we're going to talk to
Hello,
IT
thank you for
help
calling
desk.
the Virtualo IT service desk.
Now,
We are experiencing
in my fantasy demo world, we're still having a problem with ERP. Just it's easier to demonstrate that way. So we're going to skip
To
past
receive an
that part.
automated callback upon resolution, please press 1. To speak to an agent, please press 2.
So yeah, I
disconnect,
think that's my
please press
problem.
3.
I'm going to press 2. I'm going to talk to an agent, and he's going to help me solve that password problem.
To reset your domain password, please press 1.
Hey, look at that.
For hardware
That's,
issues,
that's my
please
problem.
press
I'm going to
2.
go and reset
For
my
requesting
domain
IT
password.
services, please press. For authentication, please enter your employee ID followed by the pound sign.
So you can see we can create a multi-factor situation where we can read the caller ID, understand that that user is a certain user, translate that to a username, and then cross-reference that against a third-party system like their employee ID or some kind of second factor that you would trust. The user would go and type in what their employee ID would be.
From your identity, please enter the last 4 digits of your social security number.
Maybe the social security number is something you don't want to have, or we just reference a different system, or again, you get to decide the metrics or the measurements of how you're interacting with this. But when they type in that information,
your credentials did not match. Please retry.
I didn't put my real social security number in there, but what would have happened is if I would have put it in correctly, it would have read back to me what my password was. Now, what's great about that is when a user's calling in, they're already in a vulnerable state. They forgot their password. They're calling in for the 4th time this month. That's a big problem for everyone involved. Everyone on the call here knows just the time that we spend on that. I can't remember what the stat is, but is it 30% or 40% of our calls are just reset passwords? And, it costs us, 60, 70 bucks every time we pick up the phone. Being able to recover those costs so we don't have to pick up the phone is great. And then number 2, for the user's perspective, they're embarrassed about it. They don't like calling in all of the time. It's embarrassing to them. And so this makes it so that they don't have to talk to an agent. They get what they want right away. Now, on the back end, we still need to know about it. So we're going to give us the ability to still open an incident and close an incident associated with that user. So our metrics are not gone. We're still able to interact with the user and know that this interaction happened. However, it just didn't take an agent to pick up the phone and talk to them. So it's a great way to help deflect some of those calls. What's great about this is it kind of gets everyone what they want. The users that still want to call in and still get to an agent and do skills-based routing and do those kinds of things, they can, but we're going to peel off some percentage of those calls. I don't know what that percentage is. Maybe it's 40 or 50% to where they can have their issues resolved without us interacting with them. Now we also have a portal with our password director product that lets you reset your password via web interface or at the control delete screen. But like I said, people still pick up the phone and call into us. Okay, so that's a user calling in, fixing a particular problem. What would happen if we want to kind of go towards the end of the relationship and do offboarding? I want to make sure that this user exits our ecosystem and is no longer using any of our products. So we have the ability to do that, but now let's focus again where this should actually happen. Should this be happening at an IT level? No, because this is not fundamentally an IT related problem. This is an HR related problem. So what we're going to do with HR is have them go through the process of terminating our users. We're simply going to kick off the workflow associated with that and deliver that to the end user. So we're back over here in our HR system. I'm at the contact for a Mr. Michael Myers, and I have a terminate section here. So I'm going to go in here. I could schedule a termination, or in my example, I'm just going to say that we're going to immediately terminate that particular user. And we've all had those hurried meetings at certain times of the day when we know that HR is sitting down with someone and we need to disable and remove and get rid of access. Now we're not as big of a part of that process. You can see what happened there. it started to sign out the user. In my example, I'm able to look through all the VDI systems and see where they're at and log them off the ecosystem. And then I can kick off a workflow to do whatever I want, notify their manager, notify their team, set an out of office on their email, archive their email box. The sky's the limit in terms of what that automation can do to kick in to make it go through an onboarding or offboarding process. And if we jump over here, we can see maybe not the most polite way in the world. I don't know how many HR rules that we're breaking here, but we can fire people via text as well. So I just got a text message here. It says, Mr. M. Myers, you've been terminated from Virturillo. So you can see that the goal of what our Avanti's identity solution is attempting to do is make the painful parts of bringing people on into the organization and getting them out of the organization is just so much easier. We still have to sit down and have a large discussion over what that workflow looks like, and I don't want to minimize that. That's a lot of work. You're going to have to get a bunch of people in a room. You have to get someone from HR, someone from facilities, someone from finance, someone from all the different places, and say, okay, what is it like when we hire someone? What are they entitled to? Most all you need for that is just a whiteboard, and you whiteboard out what that looks like. We then take that information and turn that into a workflow. So that's the typical process that we do for creating a request offering, so that you could have a request offering in a service management system go in and do that. The difference being is that we have the ability to automate that task. So when you normally would have said, I need to stop, I need to pause, I need to assign a task to a person now needs to go do something, add them to a group, a person needs to create their account, a person needs to give them access to an application. We're going to remove that and make it so that it's automatic. So that's the automation engine that's kicking in and doing that. And then our identity platform kind of worries about the entitlements. Should you have access to this application? All of the salespeople who are in the Midwest need access rights in Salesforce to do this function on the Midwest accounts. Those kinds of integrations can be built so that it's an automatic process, and we don't have to say, well, when Bob hires people, he does it this way, or the user has to call in 3 weeks later and say, hey, I still don't have access to this. We can provision them right up front. All right, I have a couple of questions here really quick. Does this service work with other managed service applications? So I assume we're talking about things like other ITSM platforms. The answer for that is yes. Our identity platform is independent from service management. It works as a standalone entitlements platform. So the concept of who a person is and managing that person and their attributes and their entitlements is kind of standalone. And let me show you a tiny bit what that looks like on the back end here. So I'm going to log into my Identity Director console and talk about that a little bit because I think this is a very important distinction, because a lot of other organizations are going to come back and say, oh, well, our service management platform has onboarding as part of its process. And probably what it has is it has automation. It doesn't have identity management. And the reason there's a distinction between the two of them is we have sorry, let me log in here really quick. We have multiple different sources of truth very often when we are dealing with different databases. So I'm sure in your organization, you have things like, well, we have an HR system, but HR is not everything. It doesn't have the payroll information. We have a separate payroll database for that. And that's interesting and all, but you know what? It doesn't have the memberships. Those are over in Active Directory, use Active Directory groups for that. Oh, well, that's interesting and all, but our finance application has a different set of information. And so the problem is that there isn't really one place that understands the identity of a user. We just have a bunch of different stuff, bunch of different buckets. And so what happens with the concept of identity director is we're going to act like a metadatabase where we're going to pull in attributes from those various systems. We're going to say, I want to have the payroll ID brought over. I want to have the HR hire date brought over. I want to have maybe from Salesforce, the geographies that they're supposed to manage. We're going to pull those together, and we're going to store them at the attribute level. So our attributes is where we're going to pull in multiple pieces of data from disparate systems and store them in our metadatabase. That way, when we start to do different actions, we can make centralized decisions. So we have something called an entitlement. So an entitlement can be an application, it can be a function, it could be a permission, it can be a request. So any one of these entitlements that I have, here's the ability to use the Abu Dhabi color printer. That's going to be an entitlement that I want to make sure that I have control over, right? So, for example, my qualification. Not everyone is going to qualify for that criteria. So in this case, I'm going to pull information over from their location, most likely from Active Directory, so I can understand, only people in Abu Dhabi are going to have the ability to interact with this system or with this particular printer. I don't want other people outside of the ecosystem to be able to do it. The actual execution of this has to do with that workflow, where this gives us the ability to make decisions and say, do we need approvals? If something fails, what is the next step that we should go through? So creating a workflow associated with that. So that's why identity is different than maybe an existing service management platform that you have that does onboarding. That's, being able to go create an Active Directory account, that's not identity management. Because think about not the adds and the deletions, because hiring people and firing people, you know what? I know it sounds funny. Those are the easy parts, because they're so black and white. We take them from nothing and we create their account. And when we fire people, we take their account, we disable them or delete them or do something like that. So, but when people get promoted, what happens when people change? They move from one department to another department. Those are much more nuanced and much more difficult to understand. Well, now, since we are bringing in information from HR, we are looking at titles, we are looking at entitlements, we have the ability to say, wait a minute, they just moved from the manufacturing department to the shipping department. They should no longer have access to the manufacturing department's applications, because we can detect that their title has changed. We regularly synchronize with that HR database, and the qualification says they are not qualified for it anymore, and we remove that entitlement. So removing those entitlements and doing it ad hoc, independently from just when they start or when they stop, is a very important part of identity management. So that's truly what separates the difference between identity management and, well, we have a script that creates their Active Directory account. That's, anyone can do that. Anyone can have a script that creates Active Directory accounts. Ours is a much larger, trying to solve the larger problems of entitlements. So hopefully that answered your question. If it doesn't, please type in another one. Okay, another question here. We're using Avanti Service Manager, but have not yet set up the onboarding and separations. Let's assume you're giving an employee login access to 15 different secure websites. They're terminated for cause. You need to quickly revoke their access to these different websites. Is there a way to prepare repo that shows this has been done, assuming this all works in ISM? So the short answer is yes, we have the ability to create an audit trail. So from a perspective of who was given what at what times, mine's not very exciting here, but you would see the exact transactional details that would say, here is when the user was given access to it. Here's when an approval was made. Here's exactly the time and second that that particular permission was given out. So when you went and terminated someone, and an auditor came back and said, I need to have proof when their access was revoked, you would see every single one of these pieces of information in our transaction or audit trail, showing you down to the second when these different functions happened. One thing that I would throw out the idea of is, remember, we're not a single sign-on tool. This doesn't solve the password management problem of having multiple different applications. So remember, NCSI, we actually sell multiple different products out there. I would steer you towards maybe something like Okta that is a single sign-on solution that can solve the password problem. One cool thing about that is now it only takes one call from our workflow to go and disable their Okta account, for example, to remove their access to those different systems. So if you need single sign-on and multi-factor, those are things that you'd want to look at Okta for. But when we're talking about creation and entitlements, that's where something like Identity Director, comes into play. Okay, how many applications or tool can these services sync with? Let me show you a little bit about the back end of our automation engine. So let me pull that up really quick. Let me find my automation console. The short answer is a lot. And the longer answer is we're going to have to dig in. I'll show you a website where you can browse through them on your own. So one of the goals of automation is not to create a house of cards. I always joke saying that get 100 programmers in a room and you can automate anything. What are you going to do the day after they leave? Who's going to maintain that? Who's going to write that code? We want to make it so that it is at least readable by a system administrator. I'm not a programmer. Most of the people on the phone here are not programmers either. We're system administrators. I want to be able to show you what it looks like so you could make moves and changes. Maybe not architect it from the ground up, but being able to understand kind of the logic. So here's an example of like creating an Active Directory account. If I want to create an Active Directory account, this GUI-driven interface, I can understand. Okay, I'm going to connect to the Virtuolo domain. Okay, I don't even know what security context means. Let me click this button. Oh, they made a password, a username password. It's a fancy way of saying that. Oh, domain controller? Sure. Let's go talk to that domain controller. Okay, where do we want to create it? Oh, I'm going to go and it's going to browse my Active Directory for me. Okay, great. Let's go put it in that particular OU. And then you can do things like parameters. Parameters are just variables. We would have passed over variables like the first name and last name over this application. But the goal of it is to make it so that it's really easy for you to see kind of how the process works. I don't want to sugarcoat it. This is not some thing you set up in an hour and you're done with it. No, this is complex. You're going to have to sit through those whiteboarding sessions of discussing how the workflow works and the different engines and how the connectors work. It takes absolutely time to get this up and going. But almost certainly the ROI, how much automation we can get out of it, and the results of it are almost always worth the effort. So you're going to see all the common things, the Active Directories, the PowerShells, the Avanti Endpoint Manager, being able to do printer-related things, change environment variables, play around with shares, do Active Directory moves and changes and OU stuff, connect to Exchange, talk to SCCM, talk to our Avanti Endpoint Manager, talk to AppV, Hyper-V, Nutanix, VMware. VMware is one of my favorites because as you saw in the entitlement screen here, one of the entitlements that we can create is something like adding a virtual machine to the domain. That's not something to do with hiring a person. And so that's why identity, although we kind of frame it as, when we think about hiring and firing, everything in the middle is just a big giant mess. There's lots of stuff going on there. So we want to make sure that we have identity and entitlement for those. So look at what my workflow is for adding a machine to the domain. That's complex. You need a name. You need to make sure the name doesn't exist. It needs to get approved by someone. We need to add it to the DNS record. We need to go through the whole process. So it doesn't have to be just hiring and firing people. Oftentimes these end up being other systems as well. So being able to connect to third-party systems, VMware, Citrix, Salesforce, Office 365, REST API gets us to be able to connect to anything that doesn't already have a connector built into it. Talk to Mac OS, OS X, Salesforce, ServiceNow, AirWatch, all the ones that I don't have in here. There's a button here that takes us to a website, the marketplace for Avanti, that lets you go and browse through and download more of them. So I don't have them all imported into my console here. If there's something that you're curious, oh yeah, we have been meaning to integrate with Topdesk. Well, here you go. We can create, update, and close Topdesk incidents from inside of our automation engine. So We have a large catalog of that. I think it's something like 300 connectors built out today. If anything that doesn't have a connector, we can use the REST API and make calls. Also, if you can communicate with it electronically, there's a good chance we can automate it. In here, we have in our section called Advanced, execute a command, talk to a SQL database, email someone, pop up with a message box, run a secure shell. Maybe it's an old funky system and I have to SSH into it and run a command. Great, let's do that. Do a REST API, send out an SNMP trap, run a PowerShell script. So there's a good chance we can automate even if we don't have a connector or even if we don't have something fancy like a REST API. We fall back to these more legacy technologies. Another question is identity director pricing based on the number of technicians, number of users, or something else based on the number of users. So how many users do you have in your organization that we're going to be managing the life cycle of? And it's more than just the people you're hiring, firing. Essentially, just count up all your employees. That's how our licensing is based. Okay, does Identity Director integrate with Ivanti's Service Manager service catalog? Absolutely. So all of the workflow and decisions and things that you saw me showing off here, they don't have to be done in this workflow engine. They can be done in Service Manager's workflow engine. So for example, let me pop up really quick. I have my Service Manager. Let's log into it really quick. One great way to dip your toe in the water is with the automation component. So I talk to a lot of customers and they say, that's great, that's awesome, but I don't have a month to sit down and beat up the HR people and the facilities people and try and figure out this process. They're not going to work with me. It's a political problem. I just hate the tasks that get created as part of a workflow for creating users. So if you already have an onboarding workflow, you can just add automation to it. So I'm going to open up a workflow that I have here just to fulfill Chrome, for example, that normally would have had a task. If we bring automation to the table over here on the side, you can see I now have an integration with Ivanti Automation. I can then click and drag this over and create it as part of my workflow and have the different connectors connect into it. And this is going to pull up what are called run books. So these are the run books that exist over here on my automation system. So they're kind of back here. These are what the run books look like. Run books are just a series of tasks that we're going to execute. So now you can see that if I normally already have a workflow, it's already there, just it has a task assigned to a technician to go and do something that could be automated. I can replace that with a run book. The automation kicks in, executes that, and then I don't have to have a task anymore. So a great way to dip your toe in the water if service management, or excuse me, identity management is maybe a little bit too big. Let's talk about just starting with automation and running with that. Okay, I think I've gone through all the questions. If anyone else has a remaining question, please type it in the Q&A box for now. If we didn't have time or you have something more complex or you have a larger question, you can always ask me. I have my contact information here at the end of the presentation. I just want to talk about a couple of other things. We talked about the Ivanti suite of products today. We did a very, very, very high level overview of just a few of these. We talked on some of the identity management. We showed a little bit about service management, our voice automation. We talked about some of our security and endpoint management, but there was very, very high level. If you want to know anything more or in detail or kind of have any more complex questions, please let me know. I'm happy to have a longer conversation about you. We also didn't even talk about our cloud, which is a really cool new technology for real time, being able to understand where the devices are, where they're at, what's running on them, who's running what firewall, a really cool real time analysis. Far too many times with a lot of our technologies, it's, well, here's the last time it reported in 12 hours ago what the status was, but that's just not good enough. So real time tries to make that as close to 0 seconds as possible. So thank you everyone for attending. I don't think there's any more questions, so we can go through and give away some of our gift cards and our backpacks, things like that. John showing a lovely NCSI backpack here that he's going to give away and his gift cards. So we'll go through and pick some of these questions that were some of the best questions and send out the information. So I would definitely say calling me out on the text message saying maybe it's not so secure. I always like it when people do that. So that's definitely one of our winners. Asking about the integrations with the other products. I like that because people, you need to start thinking about more than just kind of inside of our ecosystem, but pointing at all the other systems that exist in our ecosystem are very important.
Okay, so let's real quickly, let's go back on the backpack then. Who do you want to give that to, Brian?
What question did I say? The person asked about the text message. So
concerns, I believe that was Angela in the Q&A. So I believe that's Angela. And then the next one?
Who did I say? Integrations, Jonathan.
The integration, the Active Directory integration?
No, Jonathan.
Okay, Jonathan. All right, we'll give the Amazon gift card to Jonathan, and then I've got some K1 gift cards, the kart racing gift cards as well.
Here's the last question, and it's a complicated one, so I'll have to give it to Pamela. Can I explain the difference between standard and enterprise licensing in automation? So I can. It's complex. And there's a knowledge base article that talks about that. So I'm gonna have to pull that up and actually it may be in the help documentation around our automation. So give me a second here and I'll pull that up. Like I said, the gist of it is it depends on exactly what context of what you're going to do inside of it. So it's not a black and white process. It is very gray. So sorry, give me a second here. If I can't find it here in the next 30 seconds or so, I will email it out to you. But it is not as cut and dry as possible. Multi-products, provisioning, data export. This is close to the right answer, but this doesn't detail the exact specifics because this is mostly talking about trial editions. So let me find the answer and send that out to Pamela on exactly how you do that. But there's a specific thing that says, oh, well, if you're going to run this action in this context, then yes, it requires this specific license. So we'll get that answer out to you.
We had an anonymous question as why we weren't actually dressed up today or didn't have face on our paint. So I'm saying that because we just started this whole video and this new platform, that's scary enough to see these beautiful faces. So a lot of firsts today. So maybe, how about next Halloween, Brian? We promise to dress up. How about that?
I say for our Thanksgiving webinar, it could be.
You want to dress up like pilgrims and?
Great idea. I'll be the Indians.
Okay, Native Americans. Okay.
There you go.
And another first today too is I secretly went live on YouTube today. So we are definitely in the 21st century now. So great job today. I think you did awesome. So I'll let you close it up here, but I've got backpack for Angela, Amazon gift card for Jonathan. Pamela gets the $50 K1 gift card, and the other three folks, Teresa, Paul, and Dave, I've got $25 K1 gift cards we can give away to them. Brian, how about that?
Sounds great.
Happy Halloween.
All right, thank you everyone for attending. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions, please hit me up. I'm happy to go in more detail, but thanks for coming, and everyone stay safe tonight. So thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.